Welcome to Voices of the Paranormal, a podcast dedicated to experiencers of the paranormal. My name is Reagan, your hostess. You are listening to episode 19, titled Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, Part 1. If you, the listener, feel inclined to share your paranormal experience, submit your story by visiting our website at voicesoftheparanormal.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Voices of the Paranormal podcast, dedicated to experiencers of the paranormal. This is Reagan, your hostess. You are listening to episode 19, titled Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, Part 1. Remember to contact me by emailing your paranormal account to voicesoftheparanormal@gmail.com. to share your mysterious happening on the podcast. Also, like Voices of the Paranormal podcast on Facebook to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, Part 1. With a baby on the way, Edwin and Marcia Becker purchased their first property in 1970 in the city of Chicago. The previous family who had constructed the property continued dwelling within the home after their deaths. There were at least 4 human spirits lingering throughout the 2-unit or 2-flat residential building, and at least 1 negative presence that manifested in the lower unit. Edwin and Marcia Becker, as well as their several tenants, experienced apparitions, disembodied voices, object displacement, and more supernatural phenomena. The situation was incredibly stressful and created emotional turmoil for all who lived within the walls of this haunted home, including their pets. This Chicago haunting is noted for being the first televised exorcism that was broadcast on NBC in 1971. Edwin, Marcia, and their former tenant of the first floor apartment, Dan, written as Dave in Edwin's written works, also shared their experiences on Season 2 of the sci-fi television series Paranormal Witness. Both of Ed's books, True Haunting and True Haunting 2, are available for purchase on Amazon. They have outstanding reviews, and for a good reason. Edwin Becker's description is not fabricated or sensationalized whatsoever. It is truth. The truth of what living alongside the dead creates and destroys. If you yourself have lived in a haunted environment, you will find the details relatable. People expect ghosts to fit into a Hollywood stereotypical image, but they don't. They were once people and do the normal things that people do. Like you and I, they can deeply resent having their privacy violated. Edwin Becker. I wanted to tell you, I wish I would have read the second book before our last talk, because there's a lot more perspective, because it had multiple accounts and perspectives on what had happened. And, I was greatly looking forward to reading True Haunting 2, and then about halfway through, I had to put it down for a few days because it was so depressing. Despair and turmoil took hold of everyone who lived in this house. This work included multiple accounts of this haunting, and reading all of these different events and descriptions was incredibly difficult, and not just because of the apparitions and the misplaced objects or the disembodied voices, but because of the unimaginable psychological toll and basically damage that enveloped on everyone, and especially the women who lived on the first floor. That's kind of what I picked up after reading True Haunting 2. Was that it really affected the women on the first floor.
Yeah, every single one. When I owned that building, every single one.
And it was a psychological. It wasn't just, oh, I'm scared I saw a ghost, or, like that one woman, the example, like a broom comes out of a closet, or it was just it was a psychological effect.
Yeah, I believe it was. I don't know. I just know what I've been told by the people who lived there, and what I saw with my sister, which was tragic. I enjoyed writing True Hunting too, because in 45 years I never sat down and interviewed Marcia. So I never did ask her what went on when I was at work, and I learned a whole bunch. It was surprising. I mean, I learned that she taught my nephews how to read and count and stuff, and I learned she brought back things that I didn't remember. Like I broke my guitar one time in a rage, and she brought that back, and she vividly described the deterioration of my sister, which was very, very sad.
Let me just say, I would never tamper with anything or encourage this type of manifestation after reading what you all experienced, whether it be through a Ouija board or summoning or even ghost hunting. After reading your books, I would stay away from doing any sort of that activity. And you found a Ouija board in the bedroom of the upstairs unit.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And
yes.
that makes me think too, well, maybe Ben or someone in the family had conjured something up.
I believe they did, because it was well worn. I don't remember much about it, because actually at that point in my life, Ouija boards didn't mean a whole hell of a lot to me. I mean, I knew what they were, but when I found it, it was well worn, and I just tossed it. I broke it up in pieces, and it wasn't until later I got a little bit of an education about what Ouija really was. I always thought it was just a game, and I figured people pushed the thing around, and I didn't know. But if you're unfortunate enough, let's say, to use a Ouija board and to make a contact, you don't know what's coming at you, really. So I believe it's very dangerous.
To understand what exactly is happening or gain a better perspective of the paranormal, sometimes I feel like, study and investigations while physically being present at the haunted property or location must be pursued, although this has the possibility to become dangerous. And what precautions or steps would you give to those who perform these types of investigations? Do you have any?
I have mixed feelings on it. I mean, on one side, I love the science, so I kind of wish investigators would ask the right questions and enlighten us as far as what this dimension is about. So if they get a talkative spirit, let's say, find out if it's dark or light on the other side. Find out if it's hot or warm. Find out if it's hot or cold. Find out if they have time. Find out if they're bound to their location. Ask certain questions that would broaden our knowledge. You got 3,000 investigators that are registered in the United States, 3,000 groups, and all of them are asking, what's my name? Can you say my name? Is this Joe? And that's one of the questions that always makes me laugh when they ask the spirit its name, because it's going to lie to you. And it's going to lie for one simple reason, because it wants to continue to communicate. So it's dangerous. I mean, I have a real event now in my life. My nephew called me the other night, and he's not a believer. He doesn't know butkus about the paranormal. But he called me up. He knows my book, and he said, "Uncle Ed, give me some advice." And I said, "What is it?" Well, he moved into this new house. He just moved in May, and he says the lower level basement is his, and he hung his guitars in there, and he set up a music room and a workshop, because he fixes the guitars also. He said, "I leave at night." He said, "I'm very diligent about turning everything off." He said, "Yet Sarah gets up in the morning to do laundry and goes down there, and the lights are on. The lights over the workbench will be on." And he said, it didn't mean anything to me. She'd be yelling at me, which is what ghosts do. They create this tension. So she'd say, Joe, you left the lights on. No, I didn't. Blah, blah, blah. And they'd go back and forth. But he said, today, he said, something happened that he said frightens me a little bit. And he said, I'll send you a picture. So he sent me a picture. And on his workbench was a nail. And it was planted about a quarter inch into the wood in the middle of the workbench. And, a quarter inch kind of tells me it's definitely a spirit, not a demon. Because a demon would break the workbench in half. But I told him, I said, don't do anything about it. I said, you can pull it out. I said, but don't acknowledge it. Don't talk to it. And then I asked him the history of the house. And he's the first owner. It's been vacant for the most part for 7 years. So it had a couple times during the 7 years, it had short-term renters. And, I didn't want to tell them. I think I know why they were short-term. But I told him, I said, do not address it. Don't acknowledge it. I said,
don't give it attention or energy.
Yeah, don't give it any energy. And I said, don't argue with Sarah about the lights.
That's good advice. So just ignore the presences or the manifestations that they create.
Yeah, if you can, because one thing I know for sure, because I did it when I was young, if you try to stop what they're doing, which I did a number of times in different ways, then something else happens. They'll pick another activity. There is no stopping them if it's their domain. You can limit their activity. You can ignore it, which is what I recommend in most cases. Just ignore it. But if you try to stop it, it's like I told my nephew. I said, if you have the house blessed, I sent him a package of blessed items because
okay.
The one thing I believe in is you protect your bedroom. Well, I sent him a bunch of blessed items. I told him that if he gets the house blessed, I said, don't bless the whole house. Don't bless the attic. Don't bless the garage. Give them somewhere to go. Because if they're stuck perpetually in a vacuum of that they're uncomfortable with, you're going to have all kinds of activity. We had more activity, let's say, after the exorcism. We brought the priest into the house than we did before. It made him angry,
I couldn't get over how, I think it was the night after the exorcism, you heard a wailing. Both you and Marcia were in bed. I think it was around 5 a.m. maybe. It was kind of early morning. And you heard the wailing or crying coming from the living room. And then you went over on the dresser or to start the recording because there was a recorder placed there. And before you could press the record button, it stopped. And it's like an intelligence.
Yes, it stopped abruptly. And it was one of two events that I was pretty bold, and I was kind of ignorant of what I was dealing with. So that makes you kind of brave. Okay, it's what I warn investigators about. Don't be so brave, because it's a false bravado. All right, it's like shadow boxing. You don't get hit back. You can shadow box all you want, and then you get into the ring and you get punched, and you realize, holy crap, it hurts. Well, I was kind of that way. I had a false bravado, really, because I didn't know what I was dealing with. But only two things actually scared me. One was our dog, because it terrified our dog. And our dog was pretty brave and very, very loyal to the family. And, of course, the dog ran away. That scared me because I always wondered, what did that dog see?
That you couldn't see.
Yeah, because had a bear come at me, that dog would get between me and a bear. No problem. So it had to be worse than that. What the hell was it? So that kind of scared me a little bit. But that wailing was one that I've never heard anything duplicated, even in horror movies. It was, if you want to describe a banshee or something, it was a wailing. It was just a cry of anguish, pure anguish. And number one, when I heard it, you had to get goosebumps. But what worried me afterward was activities had a tendency to duplicate and be redundant. So I wondered immediately, is this the way I'm going to wake up every 5 o'clock every morning? But fortunately, we never heard it again. We only heard it the one time.
It was almost like maybe she was crying or getting over the emotional toll that she had with the exorcism after that took place, and maybe even deciding whether to move on or not. I don't know.
It could have been.
Did you ever hear any other wailing? Because there were a lot of banshee. There's like a lot of banshee like activity that took place. Did Dave ever hear anything after that?
Yeah, he did hear. He heard plenty of things, and he woke up one night to a crying, but I never heard it. So much went on. So much went on with him. He was my tenant, so I didn't. I was advised from older people who owned apartment buildings and things. They said you never make friends with your tenants. So that's what I did. I kept them at arm's length, and it wasn't until we went on Paranormal Witness, I invited him to come on the program, which he did do. We talked all night, and he had told me I'll put some of it in writing. I got about 30 pages of activity, but I didn't know any of it happened. I just didn't know. So it was like, holy smokes. I never knew his wife left him. I never knew that she wanted to move out after less than 90 days. Yeah, it was a real awakening when he told me all that.
That was the other thing, too, in book 2 that I realized. There was barely any communication with what was transpiring. Nobody talked about it. Everyone kind of kept it to themselves. And I don't know if the spirits and the other force possibly on the first floor, if this was their intention. But even after really scary things happened, I remember one, Dave was downstairs in his workshop that you had set up for him, and he was hugged too, like by the stairs, and he heard this crying. It seems.
Yeah, that blew my mind when he told me that story, because I couldn't imagine not freaking out.
But he had this Native American background and belief, correct?
Yeah, his belief, and actually his understanding of the paranormal was from the time he was a child. So he surprised me with the way his perspective of what was happening. Because they were taught from the time they were little that ghosts are part of life. When he was a young man, he was never a young kid. He wasn't afraid of ghosts because they were part of life. But the only thing that he was taught within his culture was you determine if it's good or bad. So
okay, and then you kind of carry on from there what you're going to do about it.
Yeah, if it's bad, they had no real rite of exorcism within their culture. Their advice was, if it's bad, then you leave. A whole tribe would pick up its stuff and leave if it felt it was in a bad place. If it's good, don't bother it and don't pay any attention to it. So when he was embraced, he said he didn't feel like it was a negative thing. He said so he assumed it was a positive thing, and didn't think much of it other than it surprised him. Which it shocked me. I told him I would have, as brave as I would have freaked out.
You have a computer programming background, and you are a bass guitar player, and those types of people, including yourself, I'd say, are kind of no bullshit kind of people. And did you have any belief of the paranormal as regards to ghosts and spirits before all of this took place at all?
Not really. I mean, as a kid, yeah, I believed in the boogeyman because that's what I was told. But I had no real belief in paranormal or ghosts. I probably experienced them because I grew up in a crappy part of Chicago, and we were always living in dank basements or old buildings. And yeah, I experienced chills, and I experienced a lot of sensations that I became later familiar with. But I wasn't able at a young age to interpret what the hell they were, or why. So, no, I didn't have I went into it kind of blind, other than my Catholic upbringing, which they told me there was a Holy Ghost and we have souls and things like that, which I believed in. But that anything that's earthbound, I didn't know what it was, and I absolutely I went to the priest, and he was no help whatsoever in understanding it. He was a bastard, to be honest.
There was plenty of mention in that priest how he was no help at all, and actually he was no help at all also to the tenants, right? Didn't you have tenants that also went to see him? So he wasn't a help at all. And but one thing I did read, this was in book 2, Marcia, your wife, which by the way, I loved how she told about how the two of you met, and that you dreamed of her before ever meeting her. Could you describe the dream? And was this after your first near-death experience?
It was after I got electrocuted when I was 19, and my heart stopped, and clinically I was dead, I guess. And a fellow, they brought me back to life. They had nothing in those days, no defibrillators, or there were no such thing as paramedics. A guy used lifeguard training on me to pump my chest, and eventually I came back. After that, I had a near-death experience, pretty much classic. It follows. I can typically hear someone else's near-death and tell you whether they're really right or not, because I know what it happens. It's not a scary thing. It's a very, from that day forward, I was never afraid of dying, because dying it's you're released from everything. It's euphoric, and it changed my world in that once you die, you realize you can't take anything with you.
What perspectives in your life have changed after your near-death experiences? Because, you have had more than one.
Yeah. Well, for the most part, material things don't mean a hell of a lot to me. So I don't envy people. I don't feel like, jealous if someone has something. I hope everybody wins the lottery. It's common for me to give something away. So there was a young man that was a friend of my daughter's that came over, and he couldn't afford a good guitar, so I took one off the wall and I gave it to him. And my daughter said, "Dad, it's an expensive guitar." I ain't taking it with me. That's kind of how I feel. I can afford it. I don't need it. So I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I tend to be overly generous, because I realize that, jewelry doesn't mean anything to me. That's one of the things that changed. I have had a number of solid, real premonitions in my life that came true. I rarely talk about them, but I did start having a dream that I was going to meet this woman, and she was going to be that shorter than me because I'd be looking down at her hair. And but I could never make out her face, and it was kind of a weird, funny period in my life, because we were a traveling group, so everywhere we traveled, I would look for her, and I would look for girls about that size, that color hair, and I kind of knew that I would know her. Don't ask me why I knew. But I felt like I would know her. And of course, I didn't find her until Marcia and I met.
And you had met her before. You met her already in your dream, so you knew who to...
Well, it was instant. I mean, it was the immediate feeling as soon as we touched hands. She knew it and I knew it. And so I don't know if we, I strongly believe in reincarnation.
Yeah, I read that you both believe in reincarnation. And did you experience something which led to this belief, or have you always believed in reincarnation?
I've experienced a number of things that led to the belief. Of course, I think we all walk the earth and we meet people that you immediately like or you dislike. And I think I don't know if that's chemistry or what that is in us. But I had a situation when I was working. I was an executive, And people would come from out of town, from hospitals, to visit our plant in Mundelein, Illinois. And I was very good with people, having had stage experience and everything else. Plus, I love people. So the chairman of the board would always schedule the people to come and see me. I would give them the tour of the company, and then I would take them to lunch. It was officially the way it went. Well, this group came in, and there were like 5 ladies and 1 man. As soon as they came in, I kind of focused on him, and I told him, I said, I know you. And he said, I don't think we've ever met. And I said, I had attended certain conventions across the United States, and I said, were you in Dallas? Were you in New Orleans? Were you in Atlanta? No. And I said, but I know I met you. I knew that I knew this guy. I didn't know his name, okay? Well, this is where it gets funky because he's wearing civilian clothes. We go to lunch and we're having all kinds of warm conversations, and I'm still scratching my head as to where the hell I know this guy from. And he comes back and he says, don't fret about it. He said, just know that we never met. That if we met in a different life. And he said, I'm a Catholic priest. He was in civilian clothes. He was a Catholic priest. And he said, Ed, he said, I grew up and lived in Hawaii, and only in the past few months was I transferred to California. He said, so I've never set foot on the mainland prior to 2 months ago. So it was like kind of spooky, Well, they went about their tour, and when they were all done, I had an office on a corner so I could see everything that was happening. The limousine came to pick them up, and they were walking to the limousine, and all of a sudden he turned around quickly and ran back in the building. I figured, well, he must have left his attaché case or something. No, he ran back to my office, and he was standing in the door, partially puffing and out of breath. And he said to me, Ed, he said, don't worry about it. He said, whatever it was good. And he left. I mean, it just kind of freaked me out.
What was this feeling? Like, could you describe the feeling? Like, was he like a brother?
It could be that, or like a close friend, like a relative. It was like a relative you haven't seen in a long time that you always liked. There was that kind of warmth. It was like a family warmth.
And did you see him afterward, or did he just briefly come into your life?
No, never saw him again. Never saw him again. He went back to California, and I never saw him again. But he was a Catholic priest, and he grew up on Hawaii, stayed on here, and he only came to the mainland 2 months prior to work in a hospital in California. So it's very strange. But I've had a number of things like that happened to me where I just felt like I know this person, and kind of knew how they were going to behave, kind of knew what their attitude was. You kind of know them before you even know them. And I just kind of believe that, we've been here before.
Do you think that it's possible that after your first near-death experience, that this made you maybe more sensitive to any type of ability? I don't know.
That I can't answer, and I've talked to a number of people who've had these experiences, and some of them come back with big stories about all of a sudden they got the capability of seeing ghosts or hearing ghosts. To me, I didn't come back with any capabilities. I got gypped because, other than the experience influenced my life, like I've never been afraid to die. I'm afraid I get my leg broken because that really hurts. But as far as getting dead, that's not a problem. Even my cardiologist now, a couple of visits ago, I asked him, I said, Doc, give me an idea how long I'm going to live with my heart and pacemaker and everything that I'm going through. And he gave me an estimate. And, he looked at me. He didn't want to do it. And I said, I said, I can handle it. I said, just tell me. So he told me. And, so I kind of know the clock is ticking. But I don't worry about it. I have no worry about going. It'll be a pleasurable trip, actually.
You're at peace. Do you think that the near-death experiences have kind of created this for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a couple things that your fear of death is gone. because I know what happens when you die. All of a sudden, you can be excruciating pain, but your pain leaves you, and it's replaced by a very euphoric feeling. And if you had a good experience, I've only talked to one person who had a bad experience, but you quickly realize the value of life and the things within our lives. So, like I said, I don't value objects. I just don't. I have some, so I'm not I'm not like a non-materialistic person. I've got a library that I love, and I've got a number of guitars I love to play, but I'm not attached to any of them. I just kind of feel they're mine to use while I'm here. I'm very sensitive toward relationships. So although I'm a hard person to get close to, I don't accept everybody right away. But I think that's my Chicago upbringing. But I value relationships. So, when I find a person who's kind-hearted and good person, I consider them like a diamond. There's something you hold on to.
Yeah, they're rare. They're rare. They're worth more than, everything. I always feel like with good people, good friends, good neighbors, they're irreplaceable. There's no price.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in our society today where it's, let's have lunch, I love you type of society where anything they say is meaningless, really. When you find someone who's sincere and kind, they might not be a real talkative person, or they might not be gregarious or whatever. But when you know that they have a kind heart and they're a good person, then yeah, you hold on to that person.
And I wanted to say too, going back to this was mind blowing. I was born in 1984, so reading that when Marcia was 7 months pregnant, and you're renting a complex that would not allow children at that time, and that was in 1970. It was just, I couldn't believe that. Like a landlady told you, well, I guess you're going to be looking for a new place soon. After you told her the good news. That's crazy to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, people can't imagine today what it was like in those years. I think they just passed a children's rights bill a couple of years prior to that. But prior to that, children had no rights. When I grew up, we were like animals. There was no such thing as child abuse because there was no one to talk to. And everybody could hit you. So I went to Catholic school. If I was acted poorly, boy, I got my butt beat. And if I was out too late beyond curfew, the cops used to walk the beat. So they had no trouble kicking you in the ass and telling you to get home. So cruelty to children was just. Of course, we all grew up and survived. So sometimes I laugh because today's kids, they have to stop making lawn darts because the kids got underneath. We weren't that goddamn dumb, We all had pocket knives, and we all had BB guns, and, we all grew up, and we knew better than to point it at someone and to hurt someone. Today's kids apparently don't. They're a little dense. But, yeah, landlords could do anything they wanted. So that they could say pets or no pets. They could say, yeah, we'll accept a cat. They could say no children whatsoever. They could say a working couple only and enforce it. They didn't have to go through like today. Maybe there's a legal process, 30 days notice legal to give people. In those days, they could just say, you're out, get the hell out. Yeah, the other thing was, a lot of times people will write me, women especially, they'll want to know, you bought the building by yourself. They find that strange. And it's like, they don't understand that during those periods, a woman's signature was worthless. So Marcia could have been working and everything else. Her income would never have counted toward our mortgage or toward our debt. It just didn't count.
Wow. And I know with women too, I was told even by my grandma and stuff, they weren't allowed to have credit cards. And I remember her talking about that, but just, it's totally different.
Yeah, no, you're right. They couldn't probably get a credit card on their own. That's for sure.
You inquired about this. It was in the heart of Chicago property. And you found this property in an ad, and you described it as being Amish-like, very plain on the outside, and the property had 2 units, and they each had 3 bedrooms. These were large units, and it was a fixer, the job of a handyman. But what got me, you were not even allowed to even start any sort of painting or even just cleaning before the close of the sale. And because of the sellers possibly knowing that it was haunted, you think?
Yeah, no, I know for a fact they knew it was haunted, and that they did not want me spending any amount of time in that building because they knew that I'd find out. You know, the place wasn't as big as it might sound, because a bedroom in those days was like 8 by 10. You know, yeah, we basically just were able to fit a full size bed in, and not much else. You know, no large dresser or anything like that. The bedrooms were always all small, and but that was standard kind of in the older places because bedrooms were for sleeping. There was no such thing as putting a TV up when you didn't have TVs. You know what I mean? So today we want a big bedroom like mine. I sleep in an enormous bedroom, and I got a 65-inch flat screen on the wall. You know, and all my toys and computers and stuff. That, you know, they didn't think like that 100 years ago when they were building these things.
Oh my gosh, I laughed so hard. You said the family who sold the house, as well as built the house, fought over, I think it was $2 and some change, over the real estate listing photos. And did you pay? It was really telling.
No, it really was. And I almost didn't write that in the book because I felt people wouldn't believe it. But it was true. It was $2 and change for a picture. They put a picture in, and these people started arguing. And I mean, it was a heated argument. And so I could tell, you know, these people have to hate each other, for Christ's sake. And it was the real estate man, the fat old guy, red-faced. He said, "Damn it, I'll pay it." You know, yeah, let's get past this. And he paid it. But it was only $2 and change.
And this is the same family who had kind of the lineage that have built the house, correct?
Somehow they were related because they were all getting part of this inheritance of money. So they were all there to, you know, and they weren't going to get like a bath of cash. It was like they're going to split $16,500 between 5 people.
But they were fighting over $2 and some change.
Yeah.
I wish I could see that because that was hysterical for me to read. It's just so mind blowing that this happened.
Yeah, it was a crazy period, and it was one of the reasons I knew. Sometime later in the book, I talk about this woman called Marcia and asked Marcia if she could come into the house and go up in the attic. And she showed up at our door, her and her husband, and I said, "No, you can't." And she said, "Well, we just want to run up to the attic." Well, when she said run up to the attic had no conventional way of getting up there. You had to take a stepladder, go to the roof of the enclosed porch, lift this thing off the roof to cover off the top of the exit, then climb up on the roof, and then you got to an attic window that had a hinge on it. Open that window, and then you were in the attic. Well, given the size of the window, you couldn't take anything up there bigger than a small box. So when she said she had a cradle up there, I knew damn well she'd never been in the house. So I was rude and curt, and afterward, it kind of, my wife, who was always kind-hearted, you know, she basically said, "How come you were so cold and rude?" And I said, "Marcia, my wife didn't even know how to get to the attic." I said, "They've never been in this house."
Yeah, and too, she was from Tulsa, the suburbs of Tulsa.
Yeah.
And you were from the inner city of Chicago.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think she would be more trusting.
I'll tell you a funny story, and this is a true story. We after I quit music, we went down to live in Tulsa for a while, and I enrolled in school, computer school. It was I forgot the name of it. It was something business school, but it was attached to Tulsa University. And that's where they offered, early on, there was no such thing as a computer science degree. You took specific computer classes, mathematics, programming, etc. Well, we went down to Tulsa, and her whole family finally met me. We were at the grandmother's house, and they found me kind of entertaining, because I was very direct. I've always been a very direct person, and but I was sitting in the front room looking out the window, and I could see an alley 2 houses down across the street. There was an alley, and I'm watching, just casually look out the window, and I see a guy walk up to the back door of this building, and he knocks on the door, and they let him in. And then I'm watching, and I see a Cadillac pull up on the street and park down the block. Another guy walks in there and knocks on the door, and they let him in. So I turned around to the family, and I said, "How long has the gambling joint been there?" And they all started laughing at me. "Gambling joint, And I said, "What do you think is there?" And they said, "That's the Harvard Bridge Club."
Oh.
Now, I'm 24 years old, or 21 years old, and I said, "That's no bridge club." I said, "It's a gambling joint." And they said, "Gambling joint in Chicago." They started laughing. He's from Chicago. That's how he thinks. It was 2 months later. I woke up in the morning, and papers sitting outside our apartment. I grabbed the front page, and the Harvard Bridge Club got busted, like $200,000 in cash. And the first thing I did is call her uncle and aunt, because they were both.
I told you, yeah.
Yeah, they were both professors at Tulsa University.
Oh.
And so I called them up right away, and I said, "Your Harvard Bridge Club is on the front page of the paper."
So you were very street smart and aware.
Yeah, I was very street savvy. Yeah, and being in music, negotiating with club owners and working sometimes in mafia nightclubs and stuff. I was pretty good at negotiating and handling people and confrontations or anything I ran into. So, but I could spot something. Much like today, I could smell the truck before they dump the BS. I've got like a sixth sense about people.
I want to greatly thank Edwin Becker for being a guest on Voices of the Paranormal podcast. Again, find his written works, True Haunting and True Haunting 2, on Amazon. Also, visit his website at edwinbecker.com. During part 2, Edwin and I discussed the departed family who haunted this Chicago residence and the way they manifested their presence, as well as the brave priests, reverends, clairvoyants, and mediums who tried their very best to assist the family and their tenants. Download part 2 on July 8th. Thank you for listening to Voices of the Paranormal podcast, episode 19, titled Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, part 1, in dedication to the experiencers of the paranormal. This is Reagan, hostess of Voices of the Paranormal. I want to give you thanks for listening to my podcast. If you, the listener, feel inclined to share your paranormal experience, contact by emailing this podcast by visiting our website at voicesoftheparanormal.com. Also, find episodes by subscribing to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Download episodes on iTunes and Stitcher. Voices of the Paranormal podcast, dedicated to experiencers of the paranormal. Welcome to Voices of the Paranormal, a podcast dedicated to experiencers of the paranormal. My name is Reagan, your hostess. You are listening to episode 20, titled Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, Part 2. If you, the listener, feel inclined to share your paranormal experience, submit your story by visiting our website at voicesoftheparanormal.com. Thank you for listening. This is Reagan, your hostess. Thank you for listening to Voices of the Paranormal podcast, dedicated to experiencers of the paranormal. This is episode 20, titled Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, Part 2. I will be taking a break until our next episode, which will be published on September 1st. I'll be organizing materials, reading and researching, and contacting authors and witnesses of the supernatural, and conducting interviews. Until September 1st, listen to previous episodes. Also, write to me your paranormal experience to be a voice on the podcast. If you wish to be a guest, send me an email at voicesoftheparanormal@gmail.com. Also, like us on Facebook, where in the meantime, I'll be posting previews of episodes and paranormal news and links. Remember to find all episodes on not just iTunes and Stitcher, but YouTube and our website as well at voicesoftheparanormal.com. Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, Part 2. With a baby on the way, Edwin and Marcia Becker purchased their first property in 1970 in the city of Chicago. The previous family who had constructed the property continued dwelling within the home after their deaths. There were at least 4 human spirits lingering throughout the 2-unit or 2-flat residential building, and at least 1 negative presence that manifested in the lower unit. Edwin and Marcia Becker, as well as their several tenants, experienced apparitions, disembodied voices, object displacement, and more supernatural phenomena. The situation was incredibly stressful and created emotional turmoil for all who lived within the walls of this haunted home, including their pets. This Campbell Street Chicago haunting is noted for being the first televised exorcism that was broadcast on NBC in 1971. Edwin, Marcia, and their former tenant of the first-floor apartment, Dan, written as Dave in Edwin's written works, also shared their experiences on Season 2 of the sci-fi television series Paranormal Witness. Both of Ed's books regarding this account, True Haunting and True Haunting 2, are available for purchase on Amazon. Also, visit Ed's website at edwinbecker.com. In Part 2, Edwin explains the family feud of the home's previous residents. We also discuss Myra, the Becker's first tenant, who was a family member of the original owners, who essentially came with the first-floor unit of the property. Ed also explains what happened to his sister, who resided with her sons and husband on the first-floor unit, as well as demonic possession. We talk about the residential building's apparitions of human spirits, and I even share a few of my own that I witnessed as a child. Then on to the priests, exorcists, psychics, and mediums and journalists who assisted the Beckers and their tenants. And I just had to inquire about the guardian angel who facilitated the transaction of a new home for the Beckers to help alleviate their burden of living in this haunted property. We also discover Ed had the opportunity to return to the apartment as part of a documentary. Well, let's get to it. Here's Part 2 of Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker. When things consistently fail to compute, it does point to a consistently undefined possibility. Edwin Becker. We talk about the creeper named Ben, or who you named Ben in the book, who you called Ben. You found that the property was an heir estate. So obviously, you assumed and found out that a man had died in the upstairs bathroom, and he was a member of this original family. But how did you find out that Ben died upstairs?
They told me. I was told by, I'm not sure if a neighbor told me or whatever, but they saw him come and get him and take him out. I guess he was, the neighborhood kind of knew before the building was sold that the mother lived on the first floor. And they knew that one of the sons lived on the second floor. And in fact, that was the source of another feud, because there were three sons. And the eldest son turned out to be the one where I talk about the guy who stood across the street staring at the building. That was the eldest son. And when the mother allowed the younger son and his wife to move in, and the older son didn't get the apartment, it was a blood feud. He walked away, and
And he never talked to her again, the mom.
Never again. Today I wish that I was more smart about the whole situation, and I would have ran across the street and talked to the guy. Got his story.
You didn't have to put out any initial ad for a tenant because Myra came with the downstairs unit, and she was basically your first tenant. And she was a member of the family who had built this house. There's no doubt in my mind that you've described her features and personality many times, but could you give a really quick overview of Myra and her dog?
Yeah, she was, number one, she was mean and obscene. So there was no friendly side of her at all. It was all a shotgun blast of obscenity and foul language toward everybody that I saw. She was dirty. It's like I told the people in Paranormal Witness when they cast the part, they were proud of themselves. And I told her, I said, that Myra that you cast is lovable compared to the real one. And they couldn't believe it. And I said, you wouldn't want to walk near Myra. She had piercing eyes and a hateful look on her face, dirty matted hair. And she always cradled this poodle that was dirty. I could tell it was supposed to be a white poodle maybe, but it was gray, and just a filthy poodle. And she cradled it like a baby. And it wasn't really until after I wrote the book that people started writing me and asking me questions that I never thought of before, that poodle never acknowledged me. So if Myra and I had an exchange, typically a little dog is going to turn around and defend its owner, they're going to growl or something. It never moved, And so people, upon hearing this, people said, do you think it was real? Well, I knew it was real. But the dog was just strange. And Myra stayed in her apartment. She never lit any lights, so it was always dark in there. We never saw her go out to the grocery store ever. She never walked a dog. She just stayed in solitude. And a couple of times she made accusations that we moved her furniture around.
One of the scariest incidences in the entire book was when Marcia was just trying to take a nap in the living room. And that sounds like she rarely did. It's because the living area was so active. But here's Marcia. All she wants to do is take a nap on the couch. And she actually woke up to Myra, who had entered without permission. And she was screaming about like cigarettes in her coffee. And that was horrifying, because here's Marcia just laying on the couch trying to take her nap, a much deserved nap, and here's this crazy woman in the living room yelling at her.
Oh yeah, I had to threaten her, and I would have to use language that she understood, because when we first got the apartment, my brother and I were decorating, she just burst in and scared the hell out of my brother. Because he was right there on a ladder, right by the door where she burst in. She burst in and started screaming,
It's like she has no control. She had no control over her actions.
She just felt that the house was hers. She didn't give a crap where we were living. She felt she had the right. And I had to tell her that, Myra, I'm gonna evict your ass, in plain English, and threaten her. But yeah, she was very, very mean. In retrospect, I'm not sure if she was possessed or if she was just insane. Not sure what it was. People ask me if she was a witch. I'm not sure about that. She may have been the conjurer for all I know, but I just saw her as completely insane and dangerously insane. So I always had a knot in my stomach while she was living there.
And the women who lived on the first floor after Myra, they started to portray Myra. Is that correct? Or
yeah,
how did the women transform?
They with Dave's wife Ellen, I didn't get to see a lot of it, and in fact, I was pretty much ignorant. I didn't know that living in Campbell destroyed their marriage until I did Paranormal Witness, and Dave and I spent a couple of days together. I didn't know his wife wanted to leave there within 2 months, and then she left him, and I didn't know she was tormented that much. So I can't tell you what she felt because I've never spoken with her. It's funny, she contacted me, so I know where she lives, and I said hello to her. Dan hasn't seen her in 40 years. So after they left, she disappeared with his firstborn. And but I never knew the tragedy that went on with my first tenants. I did know what went on with my sister, and that was tragic. My sister never recovered. She passed away a few years ago, and she alienated everyone in her life. She passed away as a Jane Doe, an unclaimed body in Cook County morgue, and fortunately or unfortunately, she was arrested. So they had her fingerprints on file, and they eventually fingerprinted the corpse, and they were able to locate my niece and get her a proper burial. But my sister never recovered. I mean, she went from a very bright, sparkling, strong-willed woman to something very, very dark and evil, and she stayed that way.
I was pretty upset when your wife had spent the time teaching her son how to read, and then she came up to pick him up, and then your wife, of course, was very happy. Is like, oh, look, he can read. And she said something like, oh, he's too stupid to read, or just said such negative things that weren't like her.
Yeah, I mean, if I could have went a little beyond the book, it wasn't a couple of years later that we actually tried to adopt her children, because we went to visit them, and he had stitches in his lip. And, being a young boy, I said to him, Tommy, what happened to you? And he said, Mom hit me with a truck, one of his metal trucks. And I said, did you go to the hospital? He said, yeah, I know where he went, which hospital he went to. And I said, what did they say at the hospital? And he said, doctor didn't say anything. He told me, put the bandage on and keep it clean, which, it pissed me off, because child abuse has become an socioeconomic thing. If you're poor and you live in a poor neighborhood, no one cares if you abuse your kids or not. When my wife and I we lived eventually in Barrington with our daughter. If our daughter had a black and blue mark, the doctor would put us under third-degree interrogation. And so it's like a double standard. It totally depends on where you sit, what your position in life is. But we tried to adopt the boys, and initially my sister agreed, but I put one thing in the agreement, and that was that she could never have them back. She could have complete visitation whenever she wanted, but she could never have them back. And I did that because of my upbringing, and I knew that once you introduce someone to a nice life, it's more painful when you take it away. So she thought about that for a while, and then she decided, no, well, part of it was selfish on her part, because the state was giving her so much allowance for the boys. She was going to lose her allowance, and and then she thought, well, maybe I will want them back. And but my agreement was no, not until after they're 18, they can make up their own mind. But until they're 18, no, you don't get them back. And I didn't want to see what she was doing. She was doing some very dirty, negative things that I knew the boys were open to and seeing, and she wouldn't think twice about hitting him with anything, you know.
But after living in that unit, she started.
Oh yeah, no, she changed. She changed.
And I think it's very easy for someone unknown to the reality behind these effects of paranormal activity to label someone suffering from these forces as mentally ill. And but you wrote about a journalist and writer, Tom Valentine, who had investigated patients of mental hospitals or facilities, and he found that many of them had dabbled in the occult.
Yeah, yeah, it was common. It was common, but now that I wrote the book, and now I'm sort of in it. I have plenty of friends in the paranormal of all different stations, so I know an exorcist, and I know different people. I'm seeing it, and when a person becomes possessed, obsessed, depressed, whatever the hell you want to call it, you can't get them help. They won't accept it, and if you do it forcefully, you're going to do something illegal and get arrested. And I'll give you one that I'm going through right now, which it knocked me right off my feet. This fella had a ministry, him and his wife, and he got involved in ghost investigations, and took one of these cheap computer courses on demonology, which I warned him about. You don't go looking for demons. And he went out and he did this demon hunting. Well, about a year ago, I guess he was working with an investigator, and the investigator parted ways with him. And all the investigators said was he changed. And he admitted he was a Satanist. He said the foulest things. He sent pictures of his genitals. This was the Christian minister, okay? And I said, he's got to be possessed. He's definitely got to be possessed. He talked about rape, and he talked about young girls,
How long did this take to transpire?
It had to happen within a year. So he basically, he must have encountered something that took possession of him, because they were, as far as I knew, they were just very clean, wholesome Christian people. And
they take a hold of you emotionally.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've studied, I wrote a book. I call it novelized nonfiction. But I wrote a book called Banished that took me a long time to research and talk to priests and everything else. Demons don't do what the movies, people are typically influenced by the movies. So that's how they see people, crawl across the ceiling or scary images and stuff. Demons just grab you and they take control of your life. And you see demons every day in the news. I mean, believe it or not, okay, most people don't recognize it. And that is, when you hear about a man who comes home and kills his whole family and then commits suicide, there you go. That's what a demon does. It's not going to make the man walk on the ceiling or stuff like that. And he's not going to make, spit pea soup like they do in the movies. Real exorcisms are rather rare because they terminate too quickly. All these suicides, that's all a demon wants to do. It takes advantage of you when you're in a weak state. So if you're depressed about something, you're in anguish, you're not happy with yourself, you're not happy with life, that's when the demon walks in. And if you come in contact with one, because they take possession of your weakened mind. After that, it's God knows what they're going to make you do. But it's like when I wrote the book Banished, I talked with a priest who was a prison chaplain in California. And, he said all the exorcisms should be done in people in prisons. Because he can walk, as a priest, he can walk down the cells, and he says he knows by looking at them in the eyes which ones are worth spending time with and which ones are not. He can tell that they're possessed people are in jail. They've done horrible things. Yeah, and and not being an exorcist, and he don't want to be an exorcist. He's prison chaplain counselor. That's all he wants to be. Yeah, but what he sees in prison is exactly what you'd think he would see. And I see it. I recognize it in the news. So the bell rings every time I hear a news thing that a father, a few years ago, a father took his baby and put it in the microwave.
Oh.
What the hell do you think that was? And then supposedly didn't remember it. You hear about these things, and I see demonic things on TV all the time. It's something that a lot of times people write me and they say, Ed, how do I get involved in paranormal? Ed, how do I learn about demons? My answer, and everybody can test me, and I had people test me. Contact me through my website. Tell me whatever the heck you want, and my answer is going to be the same. Don't open that door.
I just can't imagine wanting to open that door. Is it this like quick fix of just being scared they want, almost like an entertainment? They place entertainment value on these things.
Yeah, that to me is terrible, but it'll change your awareness. What happens is if you educate yourself and you experience certain things, it changes your awareness. And when I'm talking to people or groups, one of the examples I use is that when I lived out in Branson, I used to take my little dog when he was alive out at night, late at night, around midnight typically, for his last out. And I'd put him on this retractable leash. He'd go about 60 feet. And I'd just, walk through the grass barefooted. And we lived on a golf course. And I'd stare at the stars, and sometimes I'd even pray. And that was my nightly routine. One night we're coming back in to the house, and we got to the patio, and there was a copperhead snake on the patio. Not a full-size one, but not a baby either. And they're rather aggressive. So I grabbed one of my barbecue tools and I dispatched it, and that was the end of that. I told my wife, be careful. Told the neighbors, because usually there's going to be a den of them somewhere. Without thinking about it, without anything, the next night I'm going out with a dog, and I put on my shoes. For the first time in like 3 years, all of a sudden I'm putting on my shoes. That's automatic. And I take the dog out, and now I'm not staring at the stars anymore. I'm watching my dog. I'm watching the lawn. I'm watching my dog. That's what paranormal does to you, because once you sense these things, a person walks into a house and they get goosebumps. They'll just feel like, oh, those are just goosebumps. I don't think so. See, if I get goosebumps, I know something's near me.
Yeah, because you've experienced it, so you're aware. Like you said, it brings about this awareness.
Yes, and so I tell people, don't open that door. It's much better to live naively, and you'll be a lot happier. If a drape moves in my room or something that I can't explain, I assume it's a spirit. It's a traveler, what I call a traveler. And you become aware of things that you just don't want to be aware of. I think if I had a choice, I wouldn't have exposed myself to all of it.
Something I feel is important, especially in your account, is that you that the ghosts weren't scary as a visual sight. And an example would be when your tenant Dave witnessed the little girls and the white dresses playing and running in the basement. He also heard them laughing. And then how you saw the older woman sitting on the stairs in front of your complex, and then you said it was like less than 5 feet from you as you walked up the stairs. The emotional toll was high, but the apparitions were not scary.
Not at all. Yeah, they weren't scary at all. I often, when I'm on the radio, people ask me those questions, I often tell them, apparitions are not frightening. The ones that Hollywood creates can be frightening. I'm not sure how many types of spirits there are. But I do know that some of them were once people. And when those people appear, they're not dressed in costume. They're dressed like they were.
Yeah, they still had their personalities and even ways of living, it seems, when they were alive.
Yeah, and the only thing that's frightening about it, if at all, is the curiosity or the confusion you'll have when it's there 1 minute and gone the next. Then it's like, what the hell did I just see? But it wasn't like they don't go boo and they don't chase you around. If you're lucky enough, that's called the Holy Grail of paranormal. A lot of the investigators call it the Holy Grail. But sometimes people get to see premonitions, and when they do, they're always amazed by them. But never has anybody ever told me they were frightened.
The apparitions I saw as a little girl, they weren't scary because I had children in my basement. And they weren't scary. They play circle games. And I was never frightened. And I even had this woman who I now know, she was like a shaker, and an abolitionist shaker. They had moved in from Kentucky, and I would see her dance. And I didn't know before, but I found out later that shakers do dance. Oh. So it was like, wow, yeah, that's what she was doing. She was dancing. And where I saw her, it wasn't very far away from where their dwelling or, where they lived. And I just kind of think now maybe she was just kind of going down and would kind of escape, and take a walk. And then she would just kind of dance in this spot. So I don't know if I saw, was it residual or what exactly type of haunting it was. But yeah, it's just, it wasn't scary. And something that's always amazing to me about the paranormal that I know you experienced and I've experienced and a lot of us paranormal experiencers have experienced is this bubble that these energies seem to put an experiencer into. And the example would be when Dave heard the screaming and wailing, and then you upstairs, maybe you wouldn't have heard anything at that time. And having lived through this, do you have any perspective on what this bubble-like atmosphere is, or where they can insulate you from the outside? I have no clue.
I don't have a clue, except that, the one thing I do know is animals can tell, and
especially yours. And the psychic even wanted to buy your cat, purchase your cat. Was that right?
Yeah, he wanted to buy the cat, but all cats have that. If it's late at night and I'm in a room and I hear a strange sound, I'll look down at my animal to see did they hear it too, and I'm always concerned. I'm always concerned in some way. If my cat were to come into the front room right now and start staring at the corner for no reason, I would know they're seeing something. They're sensing something. So I pay attention to animals.
I wanted to talk to you too, really so much about the incredibly brave priests, the reverends, and mediums and exorcists who worked with you on this case. Not the priest that didn't, but I couldn't read enough about Joseph DeLuise, who was the real deal. And he was a psychic, and then was he also a reverend too?
Yeah, he was a minister also. In fact, a book just came out about him, and I wrote the foreword. It's called Psychic Courier. It's by Mary Lou Amami, A-M-A-M-I, and I wound up meeting her. She wound up contacting me a couple of years ago, wanting to know about my experience and how Joe was in those years, because she became his assistant for about 25 years until he passed away. And so I found her life very interesting because I knew Joe, and I was curious as to how it was being his assistant, being with him. Did she ever go on any jobs with him or anything like that? But she just wanted to know, what I knew, and I knew actually very little. I knew what he did with our Camel Street house and how he held my hand and how kind he was. Afterward, him and I went drinking a number of times. I went on the radio show with him, and we just became like two men, two friends. And I was never all that interested in his psychic ability at that point. I never did ask him to sit down and tell me about myself or anything like that. He just told me spontaneously. He said to me, "In life, you'll be very, very successful." And he said that just out of the blue one day. And I guess he was right. I wound up in a nice place,
Yeah, and he also, he had more of a hands-on approach. Example, like during the exorcism, as compared to like the minister that was involved.
Yeah, that was a bad thing. I mean, today I look at it and you'll never see a exorcist work with a medium. You know, that was a total mismatch, because when Joe came into the house, I mean, they investigated and everything else. As a medium, he was very much aware that something on the first floor in the specific bedroom was more than he could handle. He was not going to try to communicate with it, which is why he went out to find an exorcist. The exorcist, an exorcist needs a body. They need somewhere where they know the demon is, where they can confront it, where they can. You can't exorcise a house. So when William Joe Davis was brought in, he assumed that he was going to be dealing with people, not the house itself. You can't exorcise a house, so he was, useless. And more than that, it frightened him that that Joe DeLuise was going to go into a trance and allow himself possibly to be communicated with and maybe even possessed. So there was actually a friction between the exorcist and the psychic.
But Joe thought he couldn't handle it himself, and that's why he brought in the exorcist.
Yeah, and he actually tried to bring in a Catholic exorcist, Father Joe Woods, but the priest said that it would take him far too long to get approval. He said it would take him 6 months.
Yeah, because you have to go up to the Vatican.
Yeah, he had to go to the archdiocese first, and that would be some back and forth paperwork and questioning, and then if the archdiocese eventually believed it, then they would send it to the Vatican, and that's what they had to do to get permission for an exorcism. So Father Joe Woods said to DeLuise, he said, get yourself another priest, and he knew an Anglican exorcist, which was William Dale Davis.
And was this then the first aired exorcism on NBC? Was this the only attempted exorcism that took place on the house?
As far as I know, yes. Yeah. Now, I felt strongly that the priest that I brought in to do the house blessing on the day our daughter was christened, I felt strongly that he had visited there before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when we walked down the street and we got to the house, there was a look of recognition of the building. And then, then Myra started swearing at him, and it became embarrassing. But I felt he had been there before. Now, I knew damn well he didn't try to exorcise it, because he wouldn't help us whatsoever. But yeah, it was the first time. Actually, it was the first time they seriously filmed anything paranormal. The whole ritual was 3.5 hours.
The segment was like 6 minutes out of the 20 minute or something?
Yeah, it was, I think it's 6.5 minutes.
And it was taken seriously by Carol Simpson, who is the journalist.
Yeah, she's very spiritual. And it was taken very seriously by Carol Simpson, which was, surprising to me. All we ever faced was ridicule and skepticism. So, initially when they said bring in NBC, I said no, because I didn't want a reporter. What they do is they'll interview you, over a course of a few hours, and they'll pick out select sentences. And I figured they're going to make us look foolish. I didn't know that she was serious. And she had a background that was very spiritual. Yes, she believed in ghosts. And, and she was a premier reporter. She went on to be the first woman anchor of the evening news, national news out of Washington. She marched for Martin Luther King. She quite prominent. And 40 some years later, I wrote her, and she wrote me back, and I asked her, did you remember this? And she said, I'll never forget it. She said, I have 100,000 things I've done. She said, I'll never forget that.
I can't imagine how you felt during the exorcism while that was taking place, how Marcia and you both felt, but that her presence there, did it all calm you at all or make it a little better? Because she seems so trusting too, like such a trusting person. She would be the one that you would have wanted to be there, I guess, if any journalist was going to be there.
Yeah, oh, definitely, definitely. But I think during the exorcism, we were all on our own. Everybody was in their own little world, and you felt. It's one of the reasons I cannot watch, and I swear to God, the little clip on YouTube that's there, I can't watch that. Yeah, people have written me, and if you go on my website, you'll see there's a snapshot where they caught something that's over my right shoulder while I'm being interviewed. That was one of my readers that found that. And also at the minute and a half mark, you'll start to see a ghost come through the door. You'll see white, and then you'll see it back off. That's a ghost. And one of my readers found that. But I can't watch that. When I watch that, within a minute, I'm starting to smell the room and feel the vibe. I don't like it. I feel very uncomfortable.
Your Aunt Helen, I loved reading about her. And she was able to sort of sense this presence in your home. So do you think there's kind of a genetic link then in the family?
I don't know. I was told that her mother, my grandmother, used to be able to predict certain things. And I was told the story 100 times by my relatives that there were two different times when a family member died. The rest of the family was living in Michigan City, Indiana. We were in Chicago. But the day a certain family member died, Grandma woke up from her sleep in the morning and was crying. And she knew that this family member died before anybody told her, before the phone call was made. So my grandmother must have had something, but I don't know if it's passed down or whatever. I just don't know.
An encounter you had during the transaction or purchase or sale about a possible guardian angel encounter? Maybe you think that happened or transpired?
I believe it happened, and I put it in the second book because I just wanted to. It was something it's forever bothered me. Okay, because there's a number of reasons, and one of them was at the time I did that, there was something I can't explain, and that was that I was looking in the real estate section. And I look back and I wonder, why was I looking in the real estate section at work when I had no money? It didn't make any sense to me. But that's where I spotted this ad. And then the second thing is that when I called this salesman, he invited me to lunch. That's highly unusual. Okay. I mean, in those days, they met you at the property, and now there were never, in those days, there was no franchises. So there's no such thing as a Bankers or Century 21. Everything was little individual people selling real estate. So he said, yeah, he knows of this family, and we had lunch. I had lunch with him, and then he said, I'll take you to see the building, and so without telling Marcia, I set it up and went to see the building, and it was right near where I worked. I mean, it was a beautiful old building, owned by Italians that were all woodworkers. So there was a lot of fancy woodwork in the house and cabinets and things. Nothing but a good feeling when I walked in there. So I said, what's the deal? I'm thinking, what happened is they had bought a house in I forgot what city in Wisconsin, but they already owned it, and their buyer bailed on them. So I thought maybe I could buy it on contract or something. But he said, no, they want an absolute, if they take a lower price, they want an absolute buyer. And I said, well, I'm not him. Okay, I couldn't get any equity loan or anything out of my house. I had no, I'd get $200 maybe. But he said, he handed me a card for the bank, and he said, go see this man, and you'll get your loan. So I did, and I went there. I filled out the paperwork, and I'm thinking in my whole mentality was that this is a waste of time because I had no collateral. I had nothing. And 3 days later, bam, the phone rings. You got your loan.
Wow. And you were approved.
Yeah. Well, I thought they made a mistake. I really did. So, I mean, I rushed to the bank. I got the certified check, and I went right to the cashier's window. And I said, just give it to me in cash. And she said, how do you want it? I said, I don't care. I don't care. Well, $100 bills weren't as popular in those years, so you didn't give you a lot of $100 bills. So I had 5s, 10s, 20s, and I've still got the bag from the Bank of Ravenswood. She put it in a bag, a little canvas bag, and I left with the money and went to see the real estate man and said, okay, we can make the offer now. And they accepted it. They accepted the offer.
And you surprised Marcia, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she even though it was, we hadn't done the closing yet or even scheduled it at that point, she was already starting to pack, she started packing her suit. Yeah, let's get the hell out of here. But after the whole thing was done, and we had a closing, and the real estate man was at the closing, but when I went to write the book, I could remember everybody's name, and never a problem. I remember what they looked like and everything else. I couldn't remember his name. I couldn't remember the name of his company. So I said, to Marcia, do you remember his name? No, I didn't remember, so. But then she wisely said, you save everything. You must have some paperwork that'll say what the name of the company was in that. Well, I found the paperwork, and the side where they showed distribution of funds was blank. So that's where they would have showed the salesman's commission and payment to the real estate company. So I still had no damn clue. But the thing that bothered me most was I had lunch with this man twice, and I can't remember what he looks like. Yeah, I kept it to myself, and until I wrote it in the book, the only people that knew was Marcia and myself.
I think I've heard that too. I've read that somewhere where a guardian angel type being, you may not remember your guardian angel's features if you do happen to see them.
That's what I've come to understand from a lot of people, is that if you have an encounter with your own guardian angel, you'll never remember what he looks like. You might remember the encounter, but you'll never remember what he looks like or anything about him. And that's what I came to believe about that real estate man, because I shouldn't have got the loan. There's no question about that. These people took a 25% reduction in the building. The whole thing was a miracle, actually.
And he rescued you from the hell you were living in.
Yeah, and I still got the bag, the Bank of Ravenswood canvas bag,
as a memento or memory.
Yeah, because it was funny. I got the check and I figured these people really screwed up. So before they could change their mind, they're going to give me the cash. I figured once I got the cash, tap, don't take back,
And I want to say, the last thing I want to say is, the truth I learned from having read True Haunting 1 and 2 is that a haunted house takes a lot of work and has the potential to become not a place of wonder, but a heavy burden. And I can't imagine to count the hours you worked to escape and rid your family of this property.
Yeah, it takes a burden out of you in more ways than one, because eventually you don't sleep well. Of course, you're going to have bad dreams. You're always going to be anxious. There's always tension, and women tend to be more sensitive than men, so they'll typically pick up sooner. And then the husband, it's a trait that all men have, I believe, or all heads of household. You refuse to believe that something within your domain is not under your control. So all men are kind of like, no, I'm in control of this house, whether they are or they're not, all right? And they're not going to take down that facade. And that immediately creates an emotional tension between a husband and wife or partners.
And that's what this thing wanted too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it played it well. It played it well. It's much like when my nephew was talking to me the other night, that, his wife goes down and finds the lights on and scolds him for leaving the lights on when he didn't. that's the kind of tension, because he's saying, no, I didn't do that. And she's thinking, oh, BS. You know what I mean? A little bit of negativity sneaks in there. And that's the game they play. And they do it very, very well. And they feed off your emotion.
And I hear that over, time and time again where, well, it made dad upset, mom and dad upset, and then not too long afterward, a big event happened or manifested, possibly using that energy from the argument.
Yeah, it's just the fact that once you succumb to the fact that you can't get rid of it, and it's unpredictable, and you don't know what it'll do next, really, it becomes a very tense situation. Your home is not a home any longer.
Do you think they ever left, Ed, those spirits or that thing?
I don't know, but I won't take a chance either. I've been offered money to go back there.
Oh.
And somebody wanted to run a documentary of me revisiting the building because it was in foreclosure, and they found they had access to it. So it was actually an attorney contacted me a couple of years ago and said, would I be up for revisiting the building and for so much money, and they'd pay my expenses and everything else. I said, no, no way. Because if they're still there, they're certainly going to remember me. I want no part of it. They're not going to get a second shot at me. That's for sure.
I want to greatly thank Edwin Becker for being a guest on Voices of the Paranormal podcast. Find both True Haunting and True Haunting 2 for purchase on Amazon. Also visit Ed's website, edwinbecker.com. Look forward to new episodes on September 1st. And in the meantime, listen to previous episodes and remember to send me an email to give your paranormal experience a voice at voicesoftheparanormal@gmail.com. Also, tell all of the paranormal enthusiasts in your life about Voices of the Paranormal podcast. Thank you for listening to episode 20 of Voices of the Paranormal podcast, titled Talking About True Haunting with Edwin Becker, Part 2. In dedication to the experiencers of the paranormal. This is Reagan, hostess of Voices of the Paranormal. I want to give you thanks for listening to my podcast. If you, the listener, feel inclined to share your paranormal experience, contact by emailing this podcast by visiting our website at voicesoftheparanormal.com. Also, find episodes by subscribing to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Download episodes on iTunes and Stitcher. Voices of the Paranormal podcast, dedicated to experiencers of the paranormal.